people will trickle in as we are on. So, good afternoon, good morning, depending on where you are. So, my name is Olivier Defau. I am the founder and the facilitator of the UAV for Payload Delivery Working Group, and I'm very excited for today's webinar / roundtable discussion that will be focusing on the technical and logistical challenges that drone provider has encountered during their flight in Malawi over the last few months to even few years. I am here with my colleague Gabriela Elstock from VillageReach, who is helping and will taking more and more the lead of the UPDWG, the facilitation of the group. And we are also here joined by a representative from the Department of the Civil Aviation of Malawi, Ntwambi Pwanzonje. Sorry, Ntwambi, if I disturb your name a little bit, as well as Todis from the Malawi UNICEF office. And today our presenter, the panelists will include Kevin from VillageReach, Daniel from UAV Elena from Globi, and Diego from NextWing, 4 of the drone provider who has recently been in Malawi to test the platform. Just, I want to give you a little bit of a why this topic came about. So I was myself in Malawi last month, testing and witnessing some testing of some of the platform, and I noticed that some of the challenges that at that time it was Diego and his team, NextWing, was facing were already encountered by others, but the solution were not necessarily, available or widely shared. And one of the goal of this working group is really to promote sharing our experience, promote transparency, to really help the space, to help accelerate the testing and the development of the drone technology for the use in public health, and specifically for delivering goods in the public health sector. So I thought, I met with Husting from the Civil Aviation of Malawi, and we thought that it would be a good idea to invite as a drone provider talked about those challenges. So that's how this topic came about. But maybe I'm going to give the microphone to Ntwambi to introduce himself and add to this before we will give a few minutes to Todis to give us the latest on the drone, the Malawi humanitarian drone corridor, and then we will start with the presentation. And the presentation would be limited to just a 5 minutes presentation for each of the panelists. Then we'll open to discussion questions. So Ntwambi, you go ahead. Do you want to say a word?
Yep. Okay. Hello. I'm Tumbi. I am an airworthiness inspector representing the DCA and Hastings Gylos. We as the DCA are the main registration and authorization body for the civil aviation airspace in Malawi. So when it comes to anything that is flying within our country, we are the ones who will deal with most of any, making sure that it's safe, making sure that everything is up to code. And with regards to the drones and RPAs, we have a very positive view on the new technology, and we want it to go far. That's why we have pushed forth the corridor to be made. We've pushed that we have a lot of participants coming and testing their technology, leaving their information here. And so when we discovered that there was a deficiency in the distribution of information, this meeting was one of the great ideas we had to try to mitigate that problem and make sure that future participants also understand that the environment in Malawi might be not what they've tested for, and they should be ready for, and we should also have a certain, a troubleshooting guide for things that can be encountered, that is encountered by all the participants. So thank you, welcome, and enjoy the round table.
Thank you, Ntrambi. And I want to say that the Malawi civil aviation have been really critical and very participative and supportive of all the testing of drone platform, really providing even like the knowledge, technical assistance to those drone providers. Really huge help to have them on the team. It's really a great partnership that's happening in Malawi. Totis, the latest on the drone corridor in Malawi?
Yes. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone. Totis from UNICEF Malawi. I'm working as a drone coordinator in the office, in the country office of UNICEF. And as some of you might know, UNICEF Malawi has been taking strides together with the Department of Civil Aviation and other partners such as VillageReach and corridor testing partners in really utilizing and testing the drone technology for the betterment of Malawian society, but also in delivering our mandate for children and mothers. So if I can ask you, Olivia, to switch to the slide. UNICEF in Malawi, yeah, you can switch to the second one. We were the first country, actually Malawi was the first country to establish a first humanitarian drone corridor in Africa, which serves as a safe and technology-friendly environment to test drone technology. And, in the beginning, we thought that we need to give some space and freedom for the drone manufacturers, for service providers, for software developers, for also supporting technology providers, such as UTM, to really come to Malawi and test it. So we have this integrated airspace where drone manufacturers and service providers can really come and test their solutions in the area, which is around 5,000 square kilometers, and the altitude allowance it's much higher than the regular allowance, which is 400 meters above ground level within the corridor. What is also really positive about the drone corridor is that beyond visual line of sight flights are permitted there, which means that the delivery or long-range mapping missions can be conducted relatively easy. Kasungu district, which is 2 hours away from the capital city Lilongwe, it offers also very interesting infrastructure because it has one central hospital, laboratory, and also in the district itself, there are around 300 schools, health centers, and clinics, which is units of infrastructure that we deem to be very important. Another thing is that National Park is partially covered, which also serves as for the purposes of the application for environmental monitoring. And even though UNICEF doesn't have mandate for environmental monitoring, we really work with governmental partners to open up the possibilities for any type of application. And also confluence of two big rivers offers some leverage to do the work related to mapping and flood prediction. So that being said, we can go to the next slide. And so far, we have received since the beginning of the corridor, which happened in 2017. We received 22 different applications from various private, educational, and other entities. And so far, we had 7 private entities for educational institutions visit the drone corridor. Some of them have visited multiple times, such as Globi, our Swedish partner, and Helena will speak about that more later on. We also have 5, which is also very positive, is that we have 5 more entities planned this year, and we have a very busy summer in the corridor where we will have multiple different platforms testing delivery and mapping applications and even going through the same processes again. Corridor, now what we notice is that Corridor serves as a technical entry for long-term projects. And this is something that we want to see going forward, that companies that really want to contribute to development and humanitarian context in Malawi, they can come into Corridor first, prove their technology to development partners as well as Department of Civil Aviation, and then get the approval to conduct their continuous sustained flights outside the corridor, be it in north, south, or central region of Malawi. So applications that have been tested have been, let's say, 5 major applications, which is imagery, delivery, connectivity, drone training, and supporting technology. So we also were the first country to test UTM system in Africa. And also we have been using drones for delivery, mapping and connectivity purpose, as well as we had a very extensive drone design workshop together with Virginia Tech. And Kevin will be speaking about that more later on. What are the key takeaways for us and for our partners in terms of logistical and other challenges is that we have noticed several different bottlenecks that we try to work together with Department of Civil Aviation and our technical partners. And one of them is the importation of the hardware into the country. And Department of Civil Aviation has helped tremendously in liaising together with Malawi Revenue Authority with regards to that. There are also other technical and operational challenges that companies encounter. And I don't want to spoil that for you because the companies will go in much depth about the challenges. What we have been noticing is most of those challenges are possible to solve. And we take the corridor experience as a learning experience, and obviously we want to share this information with the external parties. And I'm very happy to see that there are a lot of our partners who are actually planned to come this year attending this webinar, and I hope that this webinar will be very useful for you. So thanks, and floor to the panelists.
Thank you, Todis. Thank you, Todis. Great. So the first panelist is Kevin Koschersberger from Virginia Tech. Kevin, you're on. You have so 5 minutes to present, and let's be strict on the time so we have enough time for people to ask questions or comments.
Okay. Thank you, Olivier. And you're driving the slides here, so I guess if you want to go to the next slide.
We'll do right now.
And I think in general, I don't have that much to talk about. I think this was sort of a discussion to bring up issues, and we didn't have many issues. I have to admit that things went really smoothly. I do thank UNICEF a lot for their facilitation of our activities, and I think Michael was just tremendous in streamlining the recruitment of the students that participated in the workshop and finding facilities that we could work in. So it really went exceptionally well on our end, given all the moving parts that were involved in bringing kits to be constructed for the construction of 5 aircraft with 13 students and completed in 2 days. And so we were really happy with that. The airdrome is great. I really think it's just a perfect place to do the experimentation work that we are all engaged in. And, it's having the healthcare facilities in the region plus the central, or not the district hospital, in Kasungu is a really great resource to look at use cases. And then one thing we didn't get to, which I wanted to, was to do deliveries to the hospital, but I think others have maybe have looked at that. So I didn't bring that up in this presentation, but I don't know if there's, at one point we were looking at the space near the hospital for flight operations, and maybe somebody can address that, but I think there's an interesting opportunity to look at operations in and out of the hospital. Some of the issues, that are beyond our control, things like power, what I always like to say is ESCOM can't even stick to their own blackout schedule. So, we'd have a schedule and we knew the power was going to be cut off at a certain time, and that wasn't the case. It was actually happening when it wasn't supposed to be cut off. So that was an issue. So I think having an independent power is always always important. Whether it's I just put that in there for I don't know what reason, because I couldn't find anything else to talk about. It's totally out of our control. It was, exactly what we expected. It's not always the greatest to fly in. Hotel space is limited. So I think we had issues getting hotel space when we were there. There was some other activities in town. So, that's a limited resource. Transportation is expensive unless you have some inside information on how to get lower cost transportation out of the Lilongwe. And then safety concerns, I think, there are always some unknowns in flight operations that could be maybe handled a little bit better from our end to mitigate risk. So we have been recently looking at the old Lilongwe Airport as an interesting place to operate, and I think there's other resources, there's other flying fields available that are interesting. If they're near to Lilongwe, that opens up some other opportunities. Maybe looking at linear test corridors within the main corridor to avoid overflights of communities would be interesting. So doing node-to-node route delivery could be an option, again, to mitigate risk. And eventually, I think with enough flying activity, we'll get some pretty detailed maps of this area, and it would be an interesting study, in fact, to look at how routing may occur to avoid risk to the communities. And it'll also, kind of test the whole concept of acceptability of delivery in routine operations. So I think, is that it for me? Maybe that's the last slide.
Yeah, that was your last slide.
Okay.
Thank you, Kevin. So the next speaker is Daniel from UAV8.
Good afternoon, everyone.
Good afternoon.
Okay, we came out to Malawi tail end of last year, and what I've tried to do in the couple of slides we have is just to give a sample of some of our experiences with a view to what would be constructive for the community to learn from, and obviously to try to improve things moving forward for everyone. In terms of context, we brought with us 3 aircraft of the Hansard design. And what's special about the Hansard is is a 50 kilo plus MTOW class aircraft. But specifically, what is different about it is that it is the first multi-role drone in Europe to receive a certificate of airworthiness from an EU CAA. So it presented us with a few new alternatives. Long range, 300 kilometers, 10 kilo, multi-led communications, etc., etc. And we, following the deployment tail end of last year, we are scheduled to be coming back very shortly again. Okay, if you'd like to move on to the next slide. Thank you. So from a logistical perspective, our experiences really fell into 3 different categories. The issues of logistics, trying to get stuff into the country, move stuff about within the country, and then how we're actually taking things out of Malawi. Now, obviously, when we're looking at international transportation, one of the questions that came up was, well, if we needed to deploy to a neighboring country, could we actually do it by road? And we were very strongly advised not to because of security and other reasons. So that forced us to bring everything on the flight, of which there aren't that many. Now, we did find that because of the complexity of the cargo, obviously issues to do with lipos, we use an internal combustion engine, a number of the airlines were very, what's the word I want to use? Slightly anxious because it wasn't a usual item that they were moving, about moving this stuff. And so that meant that they were very cautious, and it took longer than we expected to move the items back and forth, as they wanted additional clearances and sign-off from various engineers. One of the issues we did have was that there's a very limited number of flights into and out of Malawi, and that obviously adds a lead time whenever we need to move anything. Clearly, and what became crucial was we needed to use a local freight forwarder and facilitator to assist things through customs and then get it from customs up to Lilongwe via a truck or trucks. And so being able to engage with local support staff was absolutely crucial. Coming out of Malawi was actually even worse in terms of transportation, because we found that, again, because it was a non-standard cargo, there was a lot of reluctance by the airlines to sign off locally because it wasn't a main hub, and so there wasn't much experience in Lilongwe in handling this type of freight. So that did present us with a number of challenges. Next slide. Now, our biggest issue we had using an internal combustion engine in Malawi was that even though we were using the standard gasoline from the local forecourts, which should have been certified, we actually found that the fuel was very, very heavily contaminated, and that caused us a number of problems. Now, we believe that there was both chemical and particulate problems. The particulate is easier to solve. The chemical one isn't. Our field tests indicated that the gasoline had actually been cut with other unknown chemicals, and that was affecting the combustion. So what we've needed to do for subsequent deployments is put in place some measures which are both technical in terms of introducing new technology into the engine system to cope with these contaminants, but also improving our handling and local sourcing of fuel to try to design out of the supply chain these type of problems for next time. Okay, next slide, please. We found that the engagement and support from UNICEF and the Malawian CAA was excellent, and I'd like to take this opportunity to thank everyone involved for their support. It assisted with the Revenue Authority and assisted with all of the flight permissions as well, so thank you very much. We also took advantage of the opportunity to engage with some local institutions and local communities to try to start to help that local stakeholder engagement, and we brought with us and distributed some local donations to some private schools. So again, I'd like to thank everyone. You'll see from the last slide that the runway surface was not that reliable, and there were some areas that needed clearing, but that was done fairly quickly and without too much difficulty. Okay, that's my 5 minutes up. If anyone would like to ask me some questions later, more than happy.
Thank you, Daniel. The next speaker is Elena from Lobby.
Yes, hi there, everyone.
So yes, we can hear you. Just sorry to interrupt. Hold your questions for the end. We will have about 20-25 minutes for Q&A. There's a few questions also in the chat group. This is great. So if you prefer, just put it on the chat group. Feel free. We will tackle those question comments in a few minutes after the presenter. Thank you, Elena.
Yes, great. Hi everyone. Helena Samsiu, CEO and founder of Globi, a drone service provider. So we do not manufacture any drones ourselves. Please go ahead and skip to next slide. Yes. And we have been trying different type of drone technologies in the Malawi drone corridor since actually the beginning in 2017. We have been using some standard platforms that I'm sure that most of you are already familiar with, including both DJI and Parrot drones, as well as using some customized platforms such as Delta Quad by Flypulse and You Can Drone by Nausicore by You Can Drone, which is a Greek manufacturer. We've been using the drones both to test out drone delivery and drone cargo delivery. And we've been flying distances up to 66 kilometers and conducted around 120 flights, both primarily in the Kasungu drone corridor, but also in the Lilongwe area and Blantyre area as well. Now we can speak to the next slide, please. And we haven't really encountered so many challenges, and also a bit apologizing that my slides are only focusing on challenges, but that's what we were told. So I would also like to mention that we had excellent experience from working both with the Malawi DCA and with UNICEF. So I'm not focusing on that in my presentation, but I definitely want to highlight that as well on our end. We did encounter some logistical challenges when it comes to batteries. Flying in batteries from Sweden to Malawi was a bit of an issue, but we managed to work around that by being able to merge smaller batteries, and also we had batteries transported from South Africa in October 2018, I think that was, or 2017. So there are some ways around that, but yeah, I would say batteries is a bit of a tricky question. Also a little bit hard to get 100% sure and accurate information. IATA have the specifications that I tried to post here. You can barely see them, but everyone can just Google that. But basically, above 160 watt hours, you will encounter a problem. Below 160 watt hours, not necessarily the way that you will encounter a problem, but it's also depending on the airline and also depending on the actual airport. Because at the end of the day, the airline can allow it and the airport can say no, or vice versa. So I think batteries will remain a little bit of a tricky issue, but I think at least staying below 160 watt hours will at least limit the risk of batteries being not allowed on the flights. All right, so you can skip to next slide. In terms of GPS jamming, we haven't really encountered that, but we did have minor interference when we were flying in the longer area at Luanar University when we were flying one of the smaller drones, the GI Mavic Pro. We did encounter minor interference, but it was nothing that interrupted the flight. However, I do know that there has been some experience also from the local drone company Precision, and they have been able to solve that by being able to program the drone to circle until signal is being found. I'm not sure what it relates to, but maybe some cell tower interference, but I'm not quite sure. We haven't experienced any major difficulties with that. So yeah, so that's, I mean, pretty much all I had to say, and obviously happy to answer any questions that there might be.
Thank you, Elena. And our last panelist before we go to Q&A is Diego from NextWing, who was just in Malawi last month. Diego?
Thank you, Olivier. My name is Diego Morales, founder, CEO of NextWing. As Olivier said, we were there recently, understanding the terrain and various variables there in the Malawi area. And I'd say in general, we had a very good experience getting to know the local officials and operators, and I'd say we learned a ton, especially considering it was our first visit in the area. I apologize for the informality of our slides. We put this together pretty quickly, and it's also notable that our engineer in Bulgaria put this together, so there might be some typos here and there. I think one of our successes, and we love to pass this on, is if your gear is collapsible, compactable, something within the XYZ dimensions of an airline's oversized luggage requirements, it definitely changes the game in terms of moving your larger equipment. Usually tends to be the drone. So we found that to be definitely a huge advantage for us, moving around the multiple flights you have to hop around in Africa to get places. Even if you have that, though, you can still encounter some expenses. You don't expect the where certain airlines will charge a whole lot for oversize and some will let it go for free. So we're always happy when it's free. Let's see here. We've had a wide range of customs encounters as well, where some have no care at all and others have confiscated our equipment for the entirety of our stay. Ivory Coast in particular came up where we couldn't get our gear out for about 90% of our time there, and only got it at the very end, mostly because they didn't know what to do with it. Didn't understand what it was. We've even gone so far in some moments to just say it was for a model airplane show or something. That we've had more success with that story than saying exactly what it was. So, but we try to keep it truthful as much as possible. Yeah, and this, the repeating theme here is always, knowing what's coming from the locals. We learned more after getting to country and meeting people who operate their vehicles in country than any other way possible. So I'll probably repeat this, and that is always reach forward to folks who have been there, done that, or are doing it all the time. Next slide. Yeah, the battery issue. So we've tried various things in the past couple of years, how to move batteries around, what to do, how soon is soon enough to order, get things in. We found probably the best source is South Africa for batteries of our scale. We're talking 16,000 milliamp packs. We tend not to like to break them up into little bits as it introduces variables into your operations. You certainly don't want the batteries to be a variable. The costs were unexpected. Sometimes triple what we're used to. Actually, more than triple. So definitely something to look out for there. And if you can find local, find local. We were surprised what you could find in India, the next town over. But Africa, obviously, just, lots of time for all of the customs and handling. And having that rep is I think that was mentioned before, is certainly a concern. And being aware of the specialty parts you are used to getting easily in other parts of the world that are not to be found in country, in Africa, in continent. So plenty of spares. We were a little bit surprised in a couple of spots. It slowed us down where we had to improvise. Nothing catastrophic. And then bring a whole lot of tools for the same reasons. You cannot just run out to the hardware store and get what you need. Next slide. So on GPS and interference, one thing we learned a few days into our Malawi experience from a local operator who was extremely helpful. This is a person who's been doing a lot of mapping in the area, found a lot of folks have had some issues with the cell towers, and exactly what it is not entirely known, except what we see on our in our programs that record the kind of radio interference, and it coincided, the high powered frequencies coming out of the towers there did coincide with some interference we got, and we had to do some on-the-fly attempts at adjusting our dead reckoning. And I think actually Helena mentioned this, is you do have to be very conservative with the amount of dead reckoning you tune in to your flights, so that they can manage any longer than, say, 1 or 2 second interferences. And we found that with some more experience after Malawi, actually we've been getting good results from using the other bands that are often used for GPS antennas. So that gives you more redundancy, that gives you more robustness there. And thankfully, when we were operating in Malawi, the fail-safe modes were operating quite well, and anytime we had a major interference, we didn't have anything crazy happen. But nonetheless, these are things you have to find out when you get there. So, is this the last slide that we have? How are we doing on time here? So yeah, other little things. I think one of the best things we did was get our own vehicle and be completely autonomous to manage this logistics of having stuff set up in your hotel or bringing it all out to the fields, or getting back and forth for any particular reason, and changes of schedule. To get things arranged. In Malawi. On the fly with needing a driver, vehicle, and all that, it can be difficult. So if you are adept at driving internationally, other side of the road, all that, I would highly recommend using that skill. Anomalies in the maps, we see that just about everywhere you go. The worst we've ever seen is in India, but certainly you're going to find it in just about a lot of these regions, and things don't always match up. So that will be a time component in adjustments and such when you get there. And we, at some point when we were asking for cell tower data after we learned that was an issue, we actually went out with our truck and scouted the cell towers en route and in the intended delivery route to actually physically see where they were. And we were requesting locations from the cell providers, but as those things are predicted, you won't get that accurately or quickly. So we did what we could to see where they were by literally driving into the little townships and suburbs and seeing physically where they were. Yeah. Is there another slide?
No, that's it.
Okay, there we are. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Diego. This has been great. I want to thank the panelists, and now we're going to open for a question and comment from the audience. We have a few questions in the chat. Let's start with a question from, I'm regrouping some theme. I see some theme there, but the first theme is around local capacity building. It's a question from Patrick Mayer from We Robotics. His question is, I've heard some of these tests included a dedicated local capacity building and sustainable technology transfer to local stakeholder, which is a topic that is deep into Patrick's missions and Robotics mission. Would be great to learn more about this if it's possible. Kevin started alluding to that. Todis may have some addition. So Kevin, if you want to add, or Todis, or any one of the panelists, obviously.
Yeah, so I can start. Basically, once the company apply to access to the drone corridor, of course, among other things, they need to comply with the global goals for children that are in compliance to what is the UNICEF mission. But among other things, they also need to commit that they have to cover their own expenses and to come to Malawi and arrange all the logistics. But the final thing is that we always ask our testing partners to conduct the local capacity building. And basically, majority of our partners, I mean, all of them were mandated to do the local capacity building workshops. And some of the workshops, such as Virginia Tech's workshop, was rather extensive, where I think, and Kevin can correct me if I'm wrong, I think over 15 or even 20 local students were spending 4 to 5 days building a low-cost fixed-wing drone within the corridor and then testing the flights. And I think among our participants, we have Dumi, who actually also built one of those drones and now is trying to develop his business in Malawi. So that is one example of the local capacity. Second capacity building is that we just had with Globi back in February, where we went to the local university to really overview what is the regular drone mapping workflow and how the student, agricultural, environmental science, forestry, and other students could think of potentially using drones in their own respective research fields. So whenever a drone partner comes into the country, we always combine it with the local capacity, be it together with academic partners in country or entrepreneurial community.
Yeah, I would add that we found a very receptive audience in the workshop. It included a mix of entrepreneurs, faculty members, and students from the universities. Let's see, Must, Polytechnic, and Luana. So we had 3 universities represented there, and they all come from different areas of interest, be it natural resources, more of an engineering focus, or ecological condition monitoring. So that was kind of an interesting mix to have all these different backgrounds in the workshop, and they all had different use cases. It was good for us to learn about the use cases that we want to focus on in the future. And then one of those, as Taudis mentioned, one of those students was Dumi Kaliati, who I have a student who is heading over in a couple of weeks now to work with Dumi on building his business in drone fabrication, operation, and maintenance around the EcoSOAR design. And then we plan to be at the test corridor the last week of June. So there is there's some loop closure in this process, I think, in seeing how these startups are going to be able to implement the technology and make it a productive business opportunity for them.
Thank you, Kevin. Thank you, Taudis.
Yeah, I can add quickly to that. We've been part of quite a few of the local capacity building programs, and besides from the LUNR University training that Taudis mentioned, we've also been doing a training at MHub in Lilongwe, which is like a startup community with where around 40 different startups in Lilongwe have their offices, and it's been mostly focusing on how to conduct drone mapping missions, but also on how you can integrate technologies such as AI to automatically draw some insights from those images. And then we've also been doing some local outreach workshops where we're introducing the communities to drones so that everyone are aware of what a drone is and why the drones are there.
Thank you, Elena. So there is some general question. There's question around the drone corridor, and there is some specific question. Let me start, because this is really focusing on the challenges, the technical and logistical. Let me start with a question from TCONG. Was telemetry over SMS tested in Malawi? That's one of the questions. I don't know who wants to answer to that.
To my knowledge, only telemetry has been used so far.
Yes, yeah, we haven't done that. That's Helena from
Okay. Also, a question for UAV Aid. How did your multi-layer RF system perform? Is there really 3G, 4G coverage, or were you on the RF sat link mostly?
Thank you. That's a very good question. The system, it's a custom system that we've developed, which allows us to, effectively, we've got twin layers of radio short range, radio long range, and we're using a satellite for backup. What we've done is actually, since that deployment, we've actually incorporated an additional system which will allow us to fold in, as and when we need to, 3G, 4G if it's available. So one of the things which we're looking to test for our next deployment is to actually see how seamless the switching will be when we're dealing in an area where the coverage is patchy, as I know it will be. But in all cases, our preference is to use the radio communications, because that's something which we've got absolute control over. But then just effectively, it's a matter of layering. If we lose the radio comms, then we switch over to 3G, 4G. If we find that it's not reliable, then we switch over to the Iridium satellite comms for the telemetry. So it's a multi-layered approach to improve the robustness and resilience within the system.
Thank you, Daniel. Technical question for Diego. First one is, what maps specifically were used on GPS that had offsets? A question from TCONG.
Yeah, this is something we encountered in various places in the world. I mean, we've been using QGC in the last few months. And I'm fairly certain, I might be the wrong person to answer this question very technically, but I believe they're based on, I mean, Google Maps is really the basis for this, correct? And it's just a matter of calibration within the QGC software. Helena, I don't know if you've had experience with these issues and how you dealt with them along the way.
Yeah, I mean, we haven't had any issues that really have made a big difference for us. But I mean, again, answering a little bit like you, at the end of the day, I'm not the pilot in charge, so there might have been some other details to that.
Yeah, I think the main thing is
to
really
nothing major. I wouldn't. Yeah.
Yeah, the main thing is it's a time component, just to be aware of it. And
yes,
we tried to list as many details as possible, so that when people show up, they know that they need to have time to set things up. And setup time, if you're there for the first time, can be much longer than you expect. And that's just part of it, is making sure all things are calibrated.
And to add to that, I mean, what that you had in your presentation as well, Diego. I mean, having a local employee or a local partner is going to be key, because they know things that you as a foreigner just have no clue about. So to be able to plan with them both pre, during, and post mission is definitely recommended.
Really cool. Yeah. I like a quote that one of you put on your slide: without local partners and intelligence, you are lost. And that's totally true. Another questions, Diego, the interference issues were related to your C2 links, which RF, or with your GNSS? Way too technical for me.
Yeah, I would probably say a little over my head on this one, but I'm very happy to connect you with our lead engineer on that. And I mean, for us, there was some learning. It was a little beyond what we've ever experienced. The general statement we got from the local drone operators was that the towers there operate at a higher power. That's their understanding. We can't obviously prove that, but it does correlate in that we've flown in places full of cell towers. But maybe the difference is the density of towers is lower in Africa in general, and especially in the Lilongwe area. Therefore, they turn it up and try to reach out. And we've heard that even causes cross interference between providers. So if you live close to two towers of different providers, or even if they're mounting their antennas on the same tower, you might not get very good service on your cell phone. And we just saw spikes coming from these towers when you fly close enough to them, and close enough meaning within 1,000 meters, which we thought should be a good enough buffer for the real high end, but it was still enough. There were peaks and convergences between the emissions, and that's all I can say to it. In terms of the technical jargon, I can't go much deeper than that.
Yeah, and there's maybe a sub question from Santiago, Montenegro. We know that 900 megahertz is used for 2G phone technology, but what about RFD 868 megahertz radio models? Have they been used? Are they allowed in Malawi?
That's a good question.
Yeah, we've used them, but yeah, we've used them in Malawi, and according to the protocols that we've submitted, they are allowed, and we haven't had any issues on that side of things.
Okay, and a follow-up question from the same person, Santiago. Oh, go ahead, Torres.
Yes, the things might have changed, Helena.
Okay, all right. Sorry about that. I'm giving false info then. Yeah.
We recently checked with Macra, and so those two bands are used for IMT, so basically for mobile networks. And Macra, which is the communications agency in Malawi, they didn't give a definite answer that is a prohibited band, but they said that it might cause potential interferences. So this is a rather unclear question to us as well, and this is something that we really want to look into more in depth. And I'm sure then when Santiago is here in Malawi, we gonna find some answers. But that is I would say this is an open question for now, but we are consulting with the relevant authorities on this question.
Yeah,
so this reinforces the general feeling that, again, you need to work with your local partner. This is really, really critical.
And even doing that, you may not get what you expect. So I would go back to making sure whatever you're flying is definitely is programmed to handle anomalies. And I think our biggest learning curve was how much dead reckoning do you really need to handle these variables. It could be all sorts of things, and we probably didn't tune up as much as we should have. And that would be something that I would go back and test again.
One more technical question, then I want to reserve 5 minutes to talk about the corridor. There's a few questions of you around the corridors, but one more technical question. In some countries, LTE telemetry does only work after the cell phone company has approved the public IP address of the LTE system. Did you have the same problem in Malawi? The question again from Santiago.
Very quick answer, this hasn't been tested yet.
This hasn't been tested. Okay, great. All right, so there is some less technical question. I'm combining here a question from Catherine, Chene, Will, and Patrick Mayer again. How many flights have been completed to date in the Malawi corridor, and how many were for product delivery versus other use cases? For the one part of the question, and the second question would be, so what were you able to do after testing in the corridor that you would not have been able to do without the corridor? So maybe Torres, I think that question is for you.
Yes. So I'll start from the second part. The corridor, as I mentioned in the beginning of my presentation, throughout the time, my colleagues and we at UNICEF, we have noticed that the drone corridor has become an entry level for drone companies to really scale their operations and move out of the corridor to conduct the flights. And corridor primarily serves as this safe environment where you don't need to undergo very extensive bureaucratic procedures to obtain licenses and permissions because of the bilateral agreement between UNICEF and the government of Malawi to enable drone providers to really test their technologies. So this serves as a safe environment, and that gives also comfortability for authorities, because they know, okay, this is the area where the drone companies can really test, And of course, we did an extensive sensitization of communities in that district. That also answers to one of those questions: what have been done to secure the society within the corridor? So we have done extensive sensitization for that. And that is an infrastructure that we can give to the drone providers in case they really want to test. Coming back to the first question, there have been, I think, over 200 flights. A big majority of them still were focused on mapping and combining it for geospatial data. But I would say 1/3 of the flights have been for delivery and moving the goods. What is important to note is that there haven't been there have been deliveries of goods, but they haven't. There have been deliveries of sample goods, but not the true goods between the district hospital and village clinics, because majority of the companies were only testing it whether it's feasible or not. So we don't have this experience of long-range deliveries within the corridor, but we are sure we're gonna expand on this summer, having 2 to 3 partners really testing long-range deliveries, and we'll be able to share those learning going forward.
Thank you, Toris. A good question from
Sorry,
James.
just to add quickly to that, we conducted around 12 long-range deliveries. The longest was from district hospital into Kazungu Aerodrome, around 27 kilometers. But yes, as Todd is saying, there were sample goods that were transferred.
Thank you, Elena. Question from James. Given the leaps in the distance and range of cargo drones, were the dimension of the corridor optimal? And is there any learnings in the shape be preferable for long-range drone in future test corridors? So I think that's a pretty relevant question, because the use of drone for delivering goods, it's implied that the drone will be carrying a long distance with really unknown area, and may encounter some things that you not plan for it. While the corridor, it's a great first step. It's what's in your corridor, so it's kind of a test. It's a control environment, and so I think where James is getting at, to help with the delivery use cases, having longer range corridor, I think that's something in the near future. Tadas?
Very relevant question, and I mean, the shape of to be honest, I don't know the origins why the shape of the corridor was circular. But what we always, when we are discussing about the flight routes with the partners, we are thinking about flying sort of in loops, in the longer range loops. So that both, we want to have the long range aspect to the flight, to the test flight, but you also want to test the telemetry and radio. So it's a good, actually good question for reflection. But so far, because we had some challenges that actually meant for us not to have the flights below probably 50 kilometers. It's very hard to say whether it's optimal or not. For now, it's pretty much optimal. But going forward, when we're gonna have the companies that will be conducting longer range flights, we will see whether we want to expand the corridor or not. Anyways, the diameter of the corridor is 80 kilometers, which is a very solid range for the drone technology these days.
Yeah, it's definitely.
I could also speak to the terrain on the corridor is actually, it's set up pretty well for simulating BB loss. We did quite a bit of testing, both air and ground. Probably spent more time with that, just getting out beyond the range. There's enough undulation in the terrain to simulate that quite well. And also, I just generally like to speak to this idea that we need extremely long range in the future for the medical supply chain. Our general approach is to not reach the edges of the capabilities, especially pure electrics, and actually stay well within range, because weather is big in these places and your ranges can be reduced quite dramatically. And so we promote this idea, and seeing the map, you'll see there's a lot of clinics in the corridor, a lot of potential destinations, and that's the reality. There's lots of places to be with a VTOL drone especially, and to get to in short range. And when networks do get set up, hopefully in the future, short hopping will be probably something you'll see quite a bit. And longer flying, either large shipments on ground or things that don't really exist yet in the ecosystem of automated drones.
Thank you, Torres and Diego. I know we passed the hour. Maybe one more question, and we will be answering the other question and sending that by email, as well as the slide deck. One comment is that, so this is to promote transparency. It's a question from, I think, Sarah de la Rosa from ISG. With this lesson learned from a company be shared to prepare a new visitor to company? That is the whole purpose. This is public, yeah, as you know, and this will be accessible at any time, but it's also to prepare future hosts like the one that's going to come this summer. One quick question for all the company before they take off is, how useful has your participation been overall in order to improve your product and business potential? Do you foresee that with this lesson learned, you are equipped now to venture into other African continent emerging market? Question from Sarah de la Rosa from ISG. And then we'll close with that.
As one of the companies that has been, I think the short answer from our perspective to the question is yes. There's nothing like being on the ground and smelling the air and seeing the reality for what it is. And it certainly has helped us move forwards and got us ready for implementation and deployment into other countries in Africa.
Yeah, I definitely echo that answer. We learned a lot, and we wouldn't have been able to know what we know today if we wouldn't have been testing on multiple occasions in the corridor. So it's been very valuable.
I have to agree, certainly, but I would actually have to go so far as to say, being in Malawi, where there's maybe thanks to folks like Olivier, the intensity in which they really are looking at the effectiveness of autonomous drones to do the quick deliveries it was transformational for our company, in that we are really rethinking our business model and how we can really do more than just provide hardware and use the standard software solutions. For me, it was the flight back from Malawi really made me think twice about how much effect we can have on their needs, the specific needs that we learned by being there and talking to the civil aviation authorities, the health administration across the board. And I can't thank VillageReach and Olivier specifically enough for giving us that opportunity. And I think you know what I'm talking about, Olivier. we really rethought things a little bit and expanded our efforts, and certainly based on that really very well catered experience.
Like we said, without local partners and intelligence, we are lost. Thank you, everyone. Thank you. This has been a great session. We will follow up with answer to the rest of the question via email, and I will share the slides, and the slide will be available on the website.
Thank you, Olivier.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Tadas.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.
Thank you.